After the failed negotiations with Iran in Geneva, Donald Trump called an emergency military meeting to prepare for a large-scale war. Iran rejected the nuclear agreement proposed by the United States at the negotiations in Geneva. American sources claim that Iran rejected key American demands for a nuclear deal during the negotiations on February 26th. According to them, the special envoy of the American president, Stephen Witkoff, and Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. They stated that Iran must destroy its three main nuclear facilities in Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, as well as hand over its entire stockpile of enriched uranium to the United States of America. Not to Russia, not to China, but specifically to America. In addition, they noted that any deal must be indefinite, not like it was in 2015, to which, in Iran, the spiritual leaders stated that they would never give up uranium enrichment and are choosing war. Immediately after that, the embassies of the United States of America, China, Canada, European countries, Kazakhstan, and so on urged their citizens to urgently flee from Iran. Moreover, more and more countries around the world are evacuating their citizens and their embassies not only from Iran, but also from Iraq and Israel, since their territories may be subject to strikes. At the same time, in Israel, the air defense system was brought to full combat readiness and bomb shelters began to be opened. At the same time, Donald Trump received a report from the commander of the United States Central Command, Admiral Brad Cooper, about the readiness of American troops for war with Iran. As a result, the United States sent the most advanced F-22 Raptor fighter jets to Israel. And this is the first time that the U.S. is returning combat aircraft to Israeli territory for potential participation in military operations. Well, this is already a sign of preparations for war in the near future. My name is Alexei Peichi. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, give it a like, and leave any comment under this episode. This really helps YouTube's algorithm show this episode to as many viewers as possible. Also, subscribe to my channel. Telegram channel Peichi News, the link to it is in the description of this video where we publish breaking news as it comes in. So, now let's go through everything step by step. The Wall Street Journal reports that Iran has rejected key demands from the United States for a nuclear deal during negotiations on February 26th in Geneva. According to sources, the special envoy of the American president, Stephen Witkoff, and Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, stated that Iran is simply required, as part of this nuclear deal, to completely destroy its three main nuclear facilities in Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan, which the Americans bombed in June of last year, and also to hand over all its stockpiles of enriched uranium to the Americans. In addition, they noted that any deal must be indefinite. The Iranian representatives were not satisfied with the prospect of dismantling their nuclear facilities, completely stopping uranium enrichment and sending their stockpiles abroad, as well as imposing permanent restrictions on their nuclear program. And so, the head of the Iranian government's Information Council, Elias Hazrati, stated after the negotiations that nothing would be taken out of Iran, and uranium enrichment would continue according to the country's needs. Quote, "Other options are being considered, including uranium dilution. Iran seeks the lifting of sanctions." And according to Axios, Witkoff and Kushner were disappointed with the outcome of the meeting with the Iranian delegation. At the same time, the head of Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Abbas Araghchi, called the meeting the best and most serious so far, but added that for progress to be made in the negotiations, the Americans need to be more flexible and accommodating. According to him, the desire to reach an agreement was more noticeable than before, but further consultations with governments and preparation of documents will require more time. And according to him, the parties agreed to continue technical discussions next week in Vienna. But the Americans, by the way, are not making such statements. And in fact, so far, only Tehran and representatives of Oman, who acted as mediators in the negotiations, are talking about a possible new round of talks. The Americans are keeping completely silent. The previous rounds of negotiations took place on February 6th in Muscat and on February 17th in Geneva. And as is known, earlier Iran proposed to temporarily suspend uranium enrichment and to transfer part of its stockpile of enriched uranium to a third country, specifically to Russia. The Americans say, no, you won't transfer it to Russia, and to make an economic agreement with the Americans. So, you see how cunning this is. At the same time, President Trump demands that Iran completely stop uranium enrichment and threatens military action if the appropriate agreement is not reached. In Iran, after the negotiations, it was stated that the country's clergy decided not to give up uranium enrichment and that the Americans should make concessions. But the thing is, Trump actually made concessions, which still didn't satisfy Iran, so there's a suspicion that Tehran is simply stalling for time again. I should note that besides the demand to destroy the nuclear facilities at Fordo, Natanz and Isfahan, Donald Trump suggested still allowing Iran to keep the Tehran research reactor, which can continue uranium enrichment, but for peaceful purposes. But there is also a demand that upset not only the Iranians, but also the Russians and the Chinese, and they will definitely try to persuade Iran not to make a deal. The point is that the US demanded that all enriched uranium be handed over to the United States of America. This is a key point. Not to Russia, not to China, not to anyone else, but specifically to the Americans. But the thing is, the Russians really wanted to be cunning and suggested that all the enriched uranium from Iran be handed over to them, the Russians. And as we know, there are no guarantees that later these Russians won't secretly return it to Iran. But there is some really alarming news indicating that the United States of America is increasingly preparing for war, and in the near future. They told embassy staff in Jerusalem who do not perform emergency functions that they are allowed to leave Israel, citing increased security risks. Moreover, they recommend buying tickets and leaving Israel right now. A number of other Western governments have followed the same example. But there are also signs that Iran is preparing for war as well. The fact is that following the Americans, China has also urged its citizens to leave Iran as soon as possible. Chinese diplomats note that in recent days, Iran has faced a significant increase in external security risks. Chinese embassies and consulates in Iran and neighboring countries will provide necessary assistance to Chinese citizens for transportation by commercial flights or overland routes. And then there are probably the two most crucial signs that Trump is leaning toward attacking Iran in the coming days. Last night, immediately after the negotiations between the US and Iranian delegations in Geneva, the top American military commander in the Middle East was summoned to the White House and briefed President Trump on military options against Iran. It might seem like nothing special, but in fact this is a very important and telling moment. Let me explain why. The thing is, this was the very first time, that the commander of the United States Central Command, which is based in the Middle East, Admiral Brad Cooper, informed Donald Trump about their readiness for war, since the very beginning of the crisis with Iran in December of last year. For over 2.5 months, Cooper didn't report anything to Trump, and Trump didn't want to listen to him. Since then, Trump hasn't communicated with him, even though he's the one who will be at the very epicenter of this war. But there's another important point. It is reported that General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who will actually be giving orders to the Army, was also present at Admiral Cooper's briefing. Well, he's the commander-in-chief of the Army, and here's what's important. The White House did not hide the fact that the talks in Geneva were the last chance for diplomacy before Trump makes a decision to start the war. And then suddenly, right after the talks, Trump summons 2 key generals who will be leading this war. In addition to this, the United States of America sent the most advanced F-22 Raptor fighter jets to Israel. And this is the first time that the United States has deployed combat aircraft on Israeli territory for potential participation in military operations. The deployment of F-22s will allow the United States to more effectively protect Israeli territory and American forces in the Middle East from retaliatory Iranian strikes, if Trump follows through on his threats to attack Tehran's nuclear and missile facilities. In addition, these aircraft can be used to carry out offensive operations. That is probably even more important. Of course, as you understand, this is not the first time American troops have been deployed in Israel. Previously, the US sent units there to operate the missile defense system THAAD and deployed destroyers equipped with missile defense systems nearby. But this is the first time that combat aircraft which can be used in offensive operations has been sent there. Moreover, the deployment of F-22s is happening against the backdrop of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates stating that they will not allow the US to use their airspace or territory to strike Iran. This significantly limits Washington's ability to deploy the hundreds of aircraft needed for a large-scale operation, but it seems they have still found a solution. But the point is also that the US is publicly showcasing the strengthening of cooperation between the US and Israel to send a signal that these two powers can inflict very serious damage on the enemy. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like the video. If you found this episode interesting and useful, I ask you to support the work of this YouTube channel financially, either with your donation or a paid sponsorship subscription. Use the links and payment details in the video description or scan the QR code on your screen. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.